Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is David Novak. Dictatorship distinguishes itself from other forms of government, chiefly by its impatience toward other men and by the relentless wreaking of vengeance upon the humble and the weak. That quotation comes from General from the Jungle by B. Traven. This is the 6th book in his Mahogany Cycle, a set of books dealing with the exploitative mahogany plantation system in Mexico. They're also known as the Jungle Books, leading up to the revolution, so around the year 1910, focusing largely on the indigenous, de facto enslaved population who worked the plantations. This book takes the men and some women out from the plantation on the path to revolution. And I believe that the whole sequence merits a bit of study, given that we are presently in the United States living under the regime of a would-be dictator. We do not know how successful he will be, but he is going to try his damnedest. Recent news informs us that he has suspended the protection for Anthony Fauci, a doctor who tried to preserve public safety during the course of the COVID-19 outbreak or coronavirus, which President Trump, you may recall, referred to as a hoax. He said the numbers, there were 13 cases and it would go down to 0 in a matter of days, something like that. And so we see that quotation in action as Donald Trump tries to get Anthony Fauci assassinated, if at all possible. Is it called stochastic terrorism? The objective is to make people afraid of him and thereby to increase his own power. That is the hope, that is the plan, and that is why I think that this set of books is worth the studying. I will put a link, I will put a list in the description box of the 6 books. The first one is titled Government, and it is a eye-opening account of what being governed underneath a corrupt sort of system, such as the Trump administration wishes to install, would be like or will be like. Indeed, we are moving along the path so fast. You do not have merely one dictator at the top. Everybody is subject to the whims of some dictator upon the rungs above him. And indeed, many of us are in the position where the administration hopes to reduce us to a form of peonage. And this book is marvelous. This whole series is marvelous in terms of accustoming the reader to the ideas, giving us a vocabulary to be able to talk about and interpret the actions being done to and against us, meaning the citizens of the United States and others who, as I say, the objective is very largely to reduce our status, reduce our freedoms, certainly reduce our civil rights. So I will, and I should say that the first 5 books take place in the plantation. Well, the first 2 don't quite, but the plantation is the backdrop. Then the next books focus on the plantation, and with this, the 6th book, we leave the plantation. The men have embarked upon the path to revolution. So I posted a little screenshot of a quotation from this, and I would like to read that. I learned a new word with this, el caudillo. You can look it up at Wikipedia. Let me just read the quote. Under the dictatorship, no one, apart from the dictator, el caudillo, was more feared and also more hated than the rurales. The rurales were a mounted police force, the special weapon of the dictator, who at times was none too sure of the officers of the federal army. The rurales, particularly feared by mutinying and striking workers, were an elite troop of men and youths, excellently equipped, superbly drilled, well looked after, and well paid. Hundreds of young men had been specially enrolled in the Corps on account of their sadistic instincts. For their activities and actions, arrests and executions, their officers were responsible to no judge, only to El Caudillo himself. They were the instrument of terror by which El Caudillo mercilessly and ruthlessly repressed the slightest resistance or criticism of his authority. When, as happened in several of the textile workers' strikes, the officers of the army refused to undertake, after the suppression of the strike, a bestial slaughter of the now humbled and conquered men and women workers as ordered by El Caudillo, a troop of rurales was marched at top speed to the region. And there, what the army officers had refused to do, the rurales carried out with such brutality that in the general massacre, no one was spared who had the misfortune to find himself in that quarter of the workers' town, which had been cordoned off by the rurales. Workers and non-workers, women, children, old people, the sick, no distinction was made between them. And that happened not during a strike, but days, often weeks, after the strike had ended, when the workers had returned to the factories and the whole district was entirely quiet. It was the law of retribution and vengeance which the dictator invoked as a warning to all those who disagreed with him as to the benefits of the glorious golden age which he, El Caudillo, had brought to his people. So that is from General from the Jungle, which I hope to finish within a day's time. The fifth book in the series was The Rebellion of the Hanged, and it explicitly deals with the rebellion at the plantation. And I thought I would read another passage. Years ago, 2004, to be precise, I wrote a play about the trial of Jomo Kenyatta. And at that time, information was hard to come by, and I didn't know anything about it. I did research as well as I could. Fortunately, a book had been written about the trial, and there were, of course, other books about the time period which I consulted. I was able to get some from my library. I don't recall that I was buying books much online at that time, though I suppose it was possible. Well, I must have gotten the book about the trial from an online vendor, to be sure. But I didn't understand the Mau Mau rebellion at all. There were books that dealt with it in some detail, and the whole thing just seemed crazy to me. I had a hard time just getting my head around these armies with General China and so forth. And reading Traven talking about the peons, the enslaved indigenous workers on the plantation, as they decided to break their chains, so to speak, I think I have begun to get a little bit more insight into the Mau Mau Rebellion. So I thought I would just share this with you. The rebels were not to blame for their ideas of death and destruction. They had never been allowed freedom of expression. Every possibility of communication and discussion had been denied them. Nobody had ever come to them to talk about economics or politics. No newspaper had dared criticize the acts of the dictator. They never saw a book that might have given them any conception of how to improve their condition without recourse to destruction and killing. Those who were not on the side of the dictator had had to listen and keep quiet. The workers, the peasants, all the humble people had been deprived of every right and had only one duty: to obey. Blind obedience was inculcated in them by lashings until it became their second nature. Wherever all the rights are in the hands of a few people and the mass has nothing but obligations, not even the right to criticize, the result will inevitably be a reign of chaos. It was not only the dictator who ruled. The big industrialists, the bankers, the feudal lords, and landowners had the well-defined duty of assuring the dictator's domination. But these lofty personages at times also had something to decree on their own account. They did not do it themselves, but forced their leader, the dictator, to decide in their favor. In this way, they could enchain the people, supporting their acts with laws. If they had taken it on themselves to make decisions openly, the people would have soon seen that the leader served only to fill the pockets of the powerful. Dictating to the dictator what he should decree, however, they had their wishes published as being in the interests of the state, and thus they deceived many sincere patriots. If the workmen had proposed to the bosses an amicable discussion of their differences, the boss's reply would have been wrapped in lead, for the mere fact of a wage earner's proposing the examination and discussion of his situation was considered a crime against the state. And it was also a crime to permit workers to submit any proposal. The workers had the sole right to work hard and to obey. That was all. The rest was the business of the dictator and his cronies, to whom the right to give orders and to criticize belonged exclusively. Thus, it was not savagery that drove the Indians to assassination and pillage. Their acts could not be taken as proofs of cruelty, because their adversaries and oppressors were 100 times more savage and cruel than they when safeguarding their interests. So, a warning to anybody who does embark upon the Mahogany Cycle by B. Traven, and I do recommend that you begin with Government, the first book, as I will list in the description box. Read them in the proper sequence. The atrocities of punishment which occurred on the plantations were akin to those wreaked in other plantation systems throughout the global colonialist enterprise. as it flourished. So it's a necessary precursor to understanding then the rebellion itself. And while this book, the sixth, so far is not my favorite in the series, I think it is doing a marvelous job of explaining how the peons, as they were, are pulling themselves together into a fighting force. And in our own situation, confronted with a government which has no hesitation to use extreme violence against the innocent through what is the term, sort of brown shirt battalions, through what are they called, the Proud Boys, released from their prison cells after being sentenced with guilty verdicts amply supported by evidence after the insurrection attempt of January 6th, 4 years ago, in which even police officers were murdered. With these forces coming on the scene to wreak extrajudicial penalties at the whim of their dictator, their would-be dictator, we must learn how to combat such tactics ourselves, and to think at this point that it will, any kind of self-defense or any kind of reversal of the status quo will be effected solely by peaceful means and without recourse to violence grows less and less likely every day. I recall the letter that Martin Buber wrote to Mahatma Gandhi, and he said, Satyagraha is all well and good for you, but it will not serve us, the Jews, against the Nazi threat. And so I myself am a complete advocate and adherent to principles of nonviolence, but I believe in the days forthcoming, probably more and more people that have a vested interest in kicking out this dictator and trying to bring the system back to something with a degree of fairness. And the system we've had is far from fair. It has been skewed, to be sure, that those persons, those activists, will most likely be required to resort to violence of some sort. And so this set of books is worth the perusing in order to prepare oneself, both to steel oneself against the acts of violence which we will be victims of ourselves, perhaps, or which we will see our friends and loved ones fall prey to, but also to prepare for acts of violence such as must needs be committed in the course of what may well turn out to be a true revolutionary movement. So I am hoping, as I say, to finish with the Traven series in a day. It has been my January project, and the read has gone splendidly, just a lot faster than I would have thought. He is a masterful storyteller, and he hooks you in. As I say, book 6 is not my favorite, but I can see that the books really deserve not to be read in isolation, but all as one complete unit. Thank you very much for stopping by my channel.